Now here's Brian with today's Real Estate Show.
Good morning, Charleston, and welcome to another edition of the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show here on the Big Talker, 1250 WTMA and WTMA.com. We've got an exciting show this week. We're going to talk about, of course, what happened with regard to the Fed funds rate dropping this week. I've got Derek Goulette with Fairway Independent Mortgage in the house to help us sort through that and hopefully come away from this show with a better understanding of kind of what people think and feel and how that ultimately, I guess, changes or influences their decision-making when buying a house. Everybody's so interest rate sensitive right now. So we're going to talk about that first. And I really want to kind of dive a little deeper into what I'm kind of calling like the myth versus the reality of this market. I think a lot of people have their lines crossed as it relates to their understanding of this market and what it takes to sell a house. And then, frankly, where some opportunity is if you're going to buy a house. So without any further ado, Derek, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's always fun to be here.
Yeah, you've been on multiple times at this point, and a lot of folks have commented on the show, just as a quick aside, that they really appreciate having guests on the show, namely you. And so thank you for being here and for helping us better understand, I guess, the environment, right? The climate for interest rates and then the behavior of buyers looking to buy a home in this market. So let's kind of start with just the obvious, right? So, the Fed drops the rate a quarter point.
Yep.
What does that do to, and I know the answer to this, but what does that do to interest rates, right? Let's just start with that. I want to kind of debunk some of the misunderstanding around what the Fed does and how that impacts 30-year fixed mortgage rates.
Okay, so we got to back up, I think, a little bit. And so these guys who trade these mortgage bonds, which are independent from what the Fed does. So technically the Fed fund rate, just for a little history lesson, is what the Federal Reserve charges one member bank, meaning a bank on the street, to borrow money overnight to meet their deposit requirements. That's all the federal funds rate is. And prime is based on that. It's a margin over that. And prime is what one bank charges another bank to borrow money overnight. Now, they don't directly correlate and tie into mortgage rates, but these bond traders who are very, very, I call them wicked smart, they can use that to predict the direction of interest rates. And as the Fed is cutting rates, they can foresee what's coming in the market, and therefore they will almost front run interest rate drops. Like this week, we actually saw probably the lowest rates in about 18 months leading up to the Federal Reserve cutting their rates. And since then, because of some of the remarks that were made, we've seen a little bit of a pullback. Not a dramatic one, but a little one. Is that kind of helpful?
Very helpful, yeah. I'm curious, what were do you know what some of those comments were? What was the reasoning behind rates coming down, but then kind of jumping back up a little bit?
Yeah, so the Fed Chairman Powell, who happens to be that right now, said that... For now. He said that while unemployment is definitely creeping up and there's definitely cracks in the labor market, he said that they're still unsure of the effects of the tariffs that were put into place earlier this year, what the long-term effects of those are going to be on inflation. And so the Fed has what's called a dual mandate: unemployment and inflation. And if inflation's rising and so is unemployment, they're kind of stuck a little.
How do you feel that is, from my perspective, right, as somebody that talks to people every day about real estate for the past 20 years, I think one of the reasons why people listen to the show is because they get kind of the inside scoop, right? I've had my ear to the ground for a long time, and I help my listeners really understand what's happening in the market before, major news publications basically prove what we already know, right? I'm curious how conversations are going between you and buyers as it relates to interest rates, and if people are really priced out of the market right now, or if it's more just a waiting game because they don't want to catch a falling sword.
A lot of it's a waiting game. They feel like, gosh, if values have softened, and if they keep softening and I buy, then I'm upside down, or maybe I'll just wait until rates actually come down. And then I can really determine what I can quote unquote afford. Because there's still a disconnect between what people want to pay and what they can pay based on qualifications. And they're trying to balance that. You know, they almost have a dual mandate in their household like the Fed does. You know,
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah. They're trying to balance what they feel like they can write a check for versus what they technically could actually write a check for. And so we're
Could versus should.
Could versus should. Yeah. And we, you know, get to play a little bit of referee, a little bit of therapist in that process.
Right. With everybody being so focused on interest rates, and frankly, a lot of people focused on what the Fed's going to do.
Yep.
Right. I would love it if you could just maybe briefly explain how a buyer can go about purchasing a home for lower than, say, the interest rate that they automatically qualify for through something like a rate buy down. Let's just very simply talk, because I saw something online a few days ago, and there was this buyer saying, just learn that you can actually pay to lower your interest rate. And so maybe it's not as common knowledge as people think it is.
So the really short version of that is you're trading dollars today in exchange for the lower rate over the term of the loan.
Mm-hmm.
And then what you have to do is you have to connect with your trusted realtor and lender and say, okay, if I'm paying $5,000 to get this and it saves me $150 a month, is it likely that rates are going to fall before that figure, you know, before I make that $5,000 back or not? And then secondly, you got to look at it, is it my money or is it somebody else's money? Meaning, you know, you brought up an interesting thing, like how do you negotiate the deal so that you get the best benefit for the borrower? So I've said this before to you, I'll say it again, I'll say it till I'm blue in the face, but like when you're buying a house, unless you're paying cash, you're financing somewhere between 20 and 96.5% of every dollar of the purchase price. Unless you're a veteran, thank you for your sacrifice, you get to finance 100%. Closing costs are always dollar for dollar. And so instead of beating the seller up over purchase price, you beat them up over closing costs because that is a direct dollar for dollar savings out of your pocket. Now, if you've got to raise the price, it's still negligible because your payback period even with today's rates is like over 100 months to put your money back into your own pocket.
Gotcha. So let's walk through that for just a minute, because obviously when you buy a house, you have your down payment, right? Yep. Whatever that percentage is based on what type of loan product you want to get. And then you have closing costs, which is a combination of the actual cost associated with getting the mortgage and then prepayments toward taxes, insurance, interim interest, so on and so forth. And so the first question I have for you in regard to that is, in the loans that you're doing right now, because you do a lot of loans, what percentage of them, if you had to guess, is the seller contributing some or all of the closing costs on behalf of the buyer in order to get that deal done?
Right now, it's probably 80 to 85% of the loans that we're looking at right now, the seller is contributing some part or all of the buyer's closing costs.
And that figure, what would you say that typically amounts to as like a percentage of the purchase price? Total closing costs and so if somebody's going to go and buy a house and we're just doing very simple math to budget for that expense, we've got the down payment and then we've got closing costs.
It almost doesn't matter the price, but it's somewhere between $6,000 and $10,000. Obviously, $6,000 is the lower end of the spectrum. You know, you're buying a $200,000 house, which you might or might not find in Charleston right now, depending how far out you go.
Right.
Or up to $10,000, $11,000, $12,000, you know, for those more expensive things out there. But I would say in general, it's probably 2 to 4%.
Okay, gotcha. What we're finding on our end is that when you look tri-county wide, because we have access to some statistics that others don't, because we literally pay a statistician out of Atlanta to provide us with that information. And so sometimes I reveal that information on this show. And if anybody listening is interested in some extremely granular information on their area, their price range, this market in general, I've got more data than I know what to do with. But we're showing that about 6 out of 10 transactions are including closing costs. The seller's paying some or all of them, and the average number is $8,000 right now.
That feels about right.
Yeah. And that's something that's just changed in the market, you know, over the course of, I'd say, the past 12 months.
Yeah.
that's become more of a reality that sellers have to deal with. But I do have an interesting question for you, and I'm going to put you on the spot on this. I know that when I go and I buy a house, I have an unfair advantage because I've, done 1,500 real estate transactions, right? When you go and buy a house and you're going to get a mortgage, what are some of the tips or tricks or things that you've learned along the way that would help you basically save the most money possible in that process?
Well, in my particular case, given what I just said about it's better to beat the seller up over closing costs, I can drive way more out of my payment by getting seller money than I can parting with any additional dollars out of my own pocket or paying less for the house. And so I operate with that as my basis of understanding. So that's how I go about it. I would much rather get.
So you want as much concession from the seller as possible, not necessarily in the form of beating down the purchase price, but you want the closing costs covered. Maybe you want a little extra to buy down the interest rate or in the short term or something along those lines.
Yeah, whether it's a temporary or a permanent buy down, and I would just do the math and figure it out. My 2 cents is temporary buy downs actually overall for the next 5 to 7 years, the blended average of them is going to be significantly lower than what you could get if you paid the points towards a permanent buy down. And so you're better off with those all the way across the board.
Gotcha. That's interesting. Excellent. Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to take a quick break. I do have a few more quick questions for you if you want to stick around for a little while.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Perfect. Before we go, tell people how to get in touch with you.
Derek Goulette, call or text me, 949-280-8044.
Excellent. Guys, this is the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show. My contact information at this point. I've said it every week for the past 14 years. But the number to call or text is 843-800-0065, 843-800-0065. And if you didn't catch Derek's contact information, I'm happy to provide it to you guys. Or you can check us out online at listingsincharleston.com. That's listingsincharleston.com. Still in the studio with my man, Derek Goulette of Fairway Independent Mortgage. Trying to make sense out of everything that's going on in the real estate market. Really, I feel like that's what this show has been, at least over the course of, really, honestly, since I started it 14 years ago, but especially over the course of the past few months, I think people are just confused about the market. And so thank you for coming on and helping to shed some light on really what's going on behind the scenes and how things like, the Fed funds rate does and does not impact, a buyer's interest rate when they go to buy a house on their 30-year fixed mortgage. And I think that, just speaking personally for a second, Derek, I think one of the things that I look for in partnerships and in my businesses, because we've got several, is, we're essentially cut from the same cloth, right? We both grew up in the industry.
Yep.
You've been doing this for how long?
26 years now.
Gotcha.
It's funny, we were talking off air, but, my job in high school when I needed money was this was obviously pre-licensed, but my parents owned a mortgage company, and so they would make me put on a shirt and tie, go take a loan out from somebody, and if I had every piece of documentation, I got my money. If I didn't, for every piece I didn't have, I got docked.
That's funny. Yours was a little more glamorous than mine, but I grew up in the real estate industry too. My family did commercial shopping center development and management and leasing. And so it sounds like you were in high school in shirt and a tie. I was in high school pulling weeds in parking lots and painting fire lanes with oil-based paint in the Virginia heat. And
I'm not sure which one of us had it better.
Oh, true. But just appreciate that you're a lifetime, student of the market.
Yeah.
And we both have similar values. And so I'd love to just while we've got a little extra time, I'd love to just kind of hear your origin story and kind of what led you to where you are now, which is, an industry and thought leader in your space.
Oh, well, thank you for the kind words. So, I think that in life, it's really easy to, say I've been doing this for X years, whatever X years is. And oftentimes what you end up with is a repeating of 1 year X times.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that every day you've got to wake up and be diligent and try to get better so that you don't keep repeating the same things. And so 10, 12, 14 years ago, I was kind of a little bit on cruise control, just being candid. I had a pretty easy business in Southern California. And then, one day I woke up and I was like, this is just not enough. And so, I changed my surroundings. I changed the people I was hanging out with, and I got into coaching. I got into mentorships, and I dove deeper into getting better, which has kind of led me on the journey to where I am today. Is that helpful a little bit?
Yeah, that's great. And again, very similar story to me in that I grew up in a real estate family, got licensed when I was fresh out of college, had 2 years of a somewhat decent market before the bottom fell out in 2008. But did well in helping people out of basically the worst financial situation they'd ever been in their lives through doing hundreds of short sales and foreclosures and bank owned deals on the seller side and the buyer side, which then just springboarded us into having a top team, and we've been lucky enough to be in the top 1% for the past 15 years. That's pretty cool. But I think in that time, and because you have an interesting array of, exposure and experiences, whether it be in just taking someone through a typical loan or coaching other loan officers, or, just being in the industry, but
you get a well-rounded view.
You get a very well-rounded view. And so I think all this is leading to kind of my final question for you, which is I would love your just unfiltered opinion of the market right now and kind of where you see things going from here.
So, what I hear over and over is basically like fatigue. Buyers are just tired of, and loan officers and realtors are all tired of, quote unquote, waiting for interest rates to drop. And so that's real. I coach 5 loan officers across the country. I talked to, 55 to 60 agents in this market. They all say the same thing. Buyers are just tired. Loan officers are tired. Oh, it's going to turn. It's going to turn. Now, do I think there's a light at the end of the tunnel? Yes. Now, is it a train coming towards us or an actual light to the end of the tunnel? I'm not sure. Probably more of the light at the end of the tunnel. The Fed, even though Powell said what he said, still has indicated 2 more cuts this year. So I think that there is a lot of fatigue in the market. I think that the buyers that need to move are finding good deals and they're capitalizing. I think that the people that don't need to move are just taking their time. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, if rates hover in that high 5, low 6 range towards the end of the year, I think that all of us could get busy. I think that consumers will actually refinance a little bit, which will free up a little bit of cash flow and help the average person just feel a little more free in life.
I agree with that. I think that there's also the seller side of the equation too, right? A lot of people that would like to sell their home and buy another. But I read a statistic earlier that said that 85% of all homeowners have an interest rate at or below 5.5%. And I think 1 in every 3 people have an interest rate at or below 3%.
That is so wildly low.
It's incredibly challenging, I think, for somebody that, I'd like to move. Maybe this house isn't exactly what we need at this moment or in the near future, but we're talking about doubling or more than doubling the interest rate.
And which also more than doubles your payment.
Yeah. So, and at the end of the day, it's cash in, cash out, right? There's only so much to go around.
Yep.
That's caused a lot of people to just be like, we're just going to kind of watch and wait. And if a really good deal hits the market that I can't pass up,
then I'll go.
Yep. And so you've got a lot of people in the market that are in that exact scenario right now.
100%.
Don't need to move. There is nothing pushing me out the door. Yep. Would I like to if the stars align? Sure.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge, is finding and aligning the stars for them.
That's that fatigue a little we talked about,
Yeah.
So.
But you're always going to have people that need to move, right?
Yep.
Not every reason to sell a home is a happy one. And so, we're going to have our 4 million plus, but barely, transactions nationally.
Yep.
But it's still, millions of transactions below where we have been.
Yep.
And so we've got a lot of people that I think will transact when it makes more sense for them. The question is, what is the market going to look like at that point in time? Looking at it through the lens of the seller that needs to sell in order to buy, looking at it from the buyer's perspective, that will now have more choice, but probably more competition.
Yep.
It's, do you think by maybe spring of next year, we'll see a more invigorated real estate market?
As long as I think the consumer has a general direction for the trend of interest rates that appears to be sustainable, yes. So, last year, this time, rates fell pretty hard, kind of like they did kind of leading up to this Fed cut. And we saw a lot of activity. And then they literally, those rates lasted for as few as 10 days in a lot of these cases. And that little tiny window, just, the people that got it were super excited and pumped. The people that didn't kind of stayed on that hamster wheel of being tired of fighting. And so I think if we can sustain lower rates and have the semblance in the market that things have stabilized from an interest rate perspective and they're trending downward even ever so slightly, then you get a lot of these people who were waiting off the fence.
Right.
Because they'll remember that last time, they bought in 2020 and they had a 4.5 rate and then they got it down to 3.5 and then they, did something else with it along the way. And that will excite them again.
Quick question just while I'm thinking about it, but tell people when, generally speaking, it makes sense to refinance your rate. Like, how much do you need to take off that rate in order for it to make sense to actually go forward with the refinance? Is there a general rule of thumb there?
I think it depends on loan size, personally, and what it costs you to do it. So there's two types of costs in a refinance. There's fixed costs and variable costs. We talked a little bit about that earlier. Like the escrows are variable costs. They're due whether you do a loan or not. The fixed costs are things like title, appraisal, lender fee, etc., credit reports, flood check. And then, again, when I say loan size, like a larger loan, a quarter to 0.375 in rate is going to make a big difference in your payment. Now, the other thing to look at is if it's not just payment savings, you can do things like let's just say somebody's 2 years into a loan. You can give them a 28-year term, and instead of saving $300 a month because they took 0.75% out of their rate, you keep it at 28 years, so they're not going backwards, and now they save $260 a month. But it's $268 a month over 28 years. Still a massive number. So I think that it's really all about doing the analysis for somebody, and then having here's what it would be if it was 30, here's what's important to you in this process. It's just like when you talk to somebody about getting a new home for a purchase, what's important to you in this process? Is it to save the most amount of money? Is it to have the least amount of fees? Or is it to not go backwards and then save still a big chunk over the life of the loan?
Here's what I think would be really exciting for me.
Okay.
All right. So hear me out on this. Now, this very, very rarely happens, but when it does, let me tell you something. These transactions go way better. But here's the ideal scenario, right? Someone calls in and they say, hey, I need to sell my home and buy another.
Yep.
Before they go start spending a bunch of money on their house, or before they, find a sweet talking agent that says, oh, don't worry about anything. Just throw it on the market. It's going to sell, which is not working right now. The ideal scenario is someone says, hey, we're going to sell a home, buy another. I then get to assist them before they spend a penny on what they should and should not spend money and time and energy on their house.
Yep.
I've got the relationships to save them money so that they don't have to go and, guess as to whether a contractor is actually going to do the work on time. Right? On budget. And then, of course, they're going to buy a house. And so they speak with you before, right, they start shopping or before they put something under contract so that you can get them in the best financial shape possible to save the most money possible when they buy a house. Yeah.
Like, let's say that we do an application. We do a soft credit check, and they're at a 752 FICO. And they have one card that's at like 90% of the limit just because they spent a little extra money this month. Well, if we've got 30 to 45 days and they've got the capital to pay it down to 10%, that score is going to be over 780. There's a massive difference in a loan between a 780 credit score and a 740 credit score. There's a difference between 720 and 740. So these are all things that the earlier that we get to them, the better it is for everybody involved.
give yourself some time
Yep.
to allow the professionals to literally help you save money and frustration and stress.
You talked about the spring. If you want to buy or sell in the spring, talk to Brian now.
Yep.
Call me.
And that's the thing too. It's not like we're going to just, harass them. There was an article of an agent that literally just got arrested for harassment because she sent a potential client something like 15,000 text messages over a 30-day period.
That doesn't work?
Apparently that doesn't work. I don't know which coach she's going to, but it ain't me. All right, Derek, thanks so much for being in the studio and for helping people understand where we are with things, especially from a financing perspective. Again, that contact information if folks want to reach out to you.
Derek Goulette, 949-280-8044.
All right, guys. We're going to take a break. We're going to come back. We're going to do the second half of the show. But again, if you want my contact information, you want to engage in our services, maybe you have a general knowledge question, you'd like to get a copy of our free home seller guide, just call or text 843-800-0065, 843-800-0065, or go to listingsincharleston.com. Huge shout out to Derek Goulette of Fairway Independent Mortgage for being on the show. He's a routine guest on the program, and I just really appreciate his insight into the market. If you're thinking of buying a home or refinancing, I'm telling you, he's a great guy to get in contact with. So if you'd like his information, you can head over to our website, listingsincharleston.com. That's listingsincharleston.com. Or you can give me a call or text me, and I'll send you his information. My number, 843-800-0065. That's 843-800-0065. That comes straight to me. And we're also on, YouTube and Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and all that great stuff. Just search up the Brian Beatty team, and that way you can put a face to the voice. All right, so what I want to talk about now is kind of what I'm referring to as like the myth versus the reality of today's real estate market. And so I'll kind of just start with a question, right? When you hear news about real estate, do you feel like it actually matches what you're seeing around you? Because here's the thing. There's often a pretty big gap between what the public perceives about the real estate market and what's actually happening, right? Especially here in Charleston. So today I want to break down kind of what I feel are like the three biggest myths that we hear routinely from buyers and sellers all the time. And then just kind of give you some real, stories based on the numbers and kind of what we see on the ground every single day. And so I think really the first myth is that prices are just skyrocketing out of control, right? Homes are worth more than they should be, I think is something that we hear fairly often, right? But homes are unaffordable. Prices are still going through the roof. And yes, it's true that prices in Charleston rose dramatically during the pandemic years, but where didn't they? That's not really happening right now anymore. I mean, here's the reality. Across the Charleston County, Trident area, right, the Charleston metro area, median sales price is about $425,000. It's $424,600. Right? That's only about 1% to 2% higher than it was this time last year. I mean, we're talking very modest growth, not runaway appreciation. On something like Johns Island, as an example, homes are sitting on the market for, 68 days. One in every three listings has had a price cut so far this year. I mean, so the truth is, while values are holding steady, at least on paper, many sellers are adjusting expectations. Buyers are, I think they have more negotiating power today than they did this time last year, and certainly more than they've had in years. I mean, the reality is Charleston's been a seller-based market, right? The seller has had more advantage than the buyer for the past 10 years, right? And so buyers are taking advantage of the fact that they now have the ability to negotiate more than they have in the past with sellers and get a better deal. I think the second myth that I hear a lot is that interest rates have just killed the market. It's another common perception that rates are too high, so no one's buying. The market's dead, right? If you ask a real estate agent how the market's going right now, you're going to get a wide variety of answers. And I've talked about this on this program before, but if someone asks me, hey, how's the market? I'm going to always kind of like drill down for for more specifics, right? What is it that you actually want to know? Like, how is my business doing? How is the market in general behaving? Is it, like, do you want information if you're buying a home, selling a home, so on and so forth? There's a lot of generalities about what's happening in the market right now. And if you ask an agent how the market's going and their business is suffering, then you might get a completely different version of the quote unquote market, as opposed to talking with somebody that's doing very, very well, right? And there are going to be some serious reasons why one agent is excelling while another is maybe thinking about getting out of the business. But there's no sugarcoating this. We have had higher mortgage rates affect affordability. And for a large portion of people, real estate, especially in Charleston, is just not affordable. And even if they could afford it, many of them don't want to, because the difference between the interest rate they currently have and the interest rate they would have if they sell their home and buy another just doesn't make sense to them financially. Yeah, they might want to move and they might have a pretty good reason to move. They just can't get over the issue of having to basically double their monthly payment. In other words, they don't need to move that badly. If they do move, it's because, kind of like I was talking about with Derek, everything's kind of fallen in line for them, right? They found the perfect home at a great time, and they're able to still sell their home for a great price. A lot of it has to do with who you choose and who you surround yourself with and the team that you build to help get this done. But, homes are still selling in Charleston. It's not like interest rates have totally killed the market. Yes, it is down. It is slow in comparison to where we were a few years ago. But, we can't really compare the market of now to the market of 3-4 years ago when we had sub-3 interest rates and, double-digit appreciation in every corner of the country. It's not the same market. And that was an anomaly, right? But the reality is, while people are waiting on the sidelines for interest rates to get better and for affordability to be more attractive, the number of homes for sale on every given month is just getting higher and higher and higher. Inventory is growing. And so, yes, while buyers are, being held back by interest rates and ultimately the payment, we're seeing more and more options hit the market. What's nice about that is that you can now, if you're a buyer, pin those sellers against each other. I mean, we're already starting to see it when I look online and I look at, like maybe one condo is listed for sale. A 2-bedroom condo is listed for sale and it's been on the market for a month. And then another 2-bedroom condo comes on the market and they undercut the one that's been listed for 30 days because obviously if it was worth that, someone probably would have bought it already. So they undercut it. And now you've got the person that was on the market for 30 days that undercuts them. So it's almost like we've reversed direction in some instances, right? It used to be this game of leapfrog pricing, right? Where, well, if, John Doe lists his home for $500,000, I'm listing mine for $525,000, and you both get it in a market that's appreciating rapidly. Whereas in a market like this, that's just fairly flat. Let's just not sugarcoat it. It's a flat market right now. There might be a few areas of Charleston that are appreciating a tad, but there are also, I would say, just as many areas of Charleston that are depreciating just a tad. And a lot of that has to do with the situation that seller and buyer are ultimately in, and whether it makes sense for them personally to maybe sell it for a little less than what it's actually worth for some other reason, right? Or maybe it's, maybe you're one of 4 sellers right now that lists their home and then takes it off the market because it couldn't sell. That's happening 25% of the time, by the way. Is somebody lists their home for sale and it doesn't sell and they take it off the market. Maybe they hire another agent. Maybe they keep it off the market. But the bottom line is they listed it and it didn't sell. So they pull it off and then they try again or they don't. But what's nice about this increase in inventory, right? Getting back to this myth that interest rates have killed the market, it's not necessarily true because we've seen about a 36% increase in inventory in Charleston year over year. So that gives buyers more options. That is what's leading sellers to say, yeah, sure. I mean, I'll pay some or all of your closing costs. If that means getting the deal done, it would probably be better than sitting on the market for another 30 days and then having to do another price reduction, right? That's kind of the paradigm shift in this market right now. And a lot of that has to do with how you approach the market when you first list it. Are you going to intentionally overprice it and then slowly bring the price down to try and find the market, right? for the folks that take that path, just understand that while you're waiting to see if you get lucky, basically, you have all these other people that have put their home on the market that might be a lot more realistic about the price it will actually sell for. And if they do get that price, even if they've, undercut that price a little bit, guess what? That then becomes the market value because that's what people are paying. And people are going to say, well, why would I pay more for basically the same property when there are 2 or 3 others that are priced lower than yours, right? You essentially, if you're an overpriced listing, you help the people that are more appropriately priced sell faster. So, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, while rates have kind of changed the psychology, they haven't stopped people from buying. I mean, people are still going to relocate, retire, upsize, downsize. Life keeps moving, right? So instead of thinking nobody is buying, I mean, the real story is that just the dynamic has shifted, right? It's less about frenzied bidding wars and more about strategy and negotiation and being prepared. And, in regard to bidding wars, I think the third myth really just has to revolve around the mentality of the seller when they put their home on the market. There are still a lot of agents out there for not very many transactions. Last year, I think the statistic was 72% of people that held a real estate license did not sell a home last year, which is shocking. But that also shows you how many people have real estate licenses, right? It also should, I think, hopefully highlight the fact that there are major differences between agents, right? And you deserve to understand what those differences are, which means you need to interview your agent, right? You need to ask them questions. You need to probably interview multiple agents so you can compare and contrast. But the third is that, you can't just put your home on the market, forget about curb appeal, not clean your home up, and think that the market is going to pay you for full market value for it. It's right now, it's just not. Unless you own an incredibly unique property, chances are you're going to hit the market and you're just going to sit there. So taking time to prep your home for sale, making the right repairs or renovations, making the right listing price decision, and then ultimately aligning yourself with an agent that has a true marketing plan. That is so important right now. Is I think agents do a really good job of talking about all the things they can do or have done in the past. But I think what a lot of sellers are missing, and this is something that you should pay attention to, if you're going to sell your house, you want the agent that you are aligning yourself with to have a customized approach to selling your house. In other words, the question should be, all right, well, we've talked about your experience and your pricing and your process. How are you going to find buyers for my house? That is an incredibly important question that I feel sellers are not asking, because we're kind of back to the type of market where, we're getting a lot of calls from folks that are like, hey, we've tried selling our home. It's not working. We need a different approach. What do you suggest? And so my advice is to try and get it right the first time. I mean, I know you can't be perfect every time, of course, but make sure that you're doing your own due diligence when you hire an agent and you ultimately sell a property. I mean, it's your responsibility as your homeowner to protect your investment and your bottom line. It's the agents as well. But if you're hiring someone that's just transactional in nature, if you're hiring somebody that just doesn't quite have the skills and the approach and the process and the budget and the time frame, or just time in general, the availability of time, then it's going to be a challenging transaction for you. So that's why we put together this guide, which is the most comprehensive home seller guide in Charleston. It's got all kinds of information on it. It's close to about 50 pages, handwritten by me, hand typed by me rather. But it's all of my thoughts and opinions on how to save money in a real estate transaction. So if you'd like a copy of that, text the word guide to 843-800-0065. That's 843-800-0065. Type the word guide and text it to 843-800-0065, or check us out online and you can get a copy of it there as well. I want to end with an article that I read recently. It was an article that came out based on a new study done by realtor.com. And it says in this study that the best week out of the entire year to buy a house is from October 12th to October 18th, right? This applies nationwide. And so I kind of want to just pick this apart for a little second here. So, that was the national, I guess, headline that a lot of people, at least from my inner circle, kind of just, it's a little bit ridiculous if I'm being honest, but I kind of understand the mentality behind it, right? It's, you've got people that, if you tried selling your home in the summer months and now school is back in session, maybe you're just a little irritated. Maybe you feel like you've missed the market. And so when someone comes along, you feel like you kind of have to give them a shot, and you end up maybe selling the home for less than you probably should, or at least wanted to. I mean, I can understand that. And I think for buyers, you've got an interesting time in that, again, you've got people that have had their home on the market for months that have not sold. They're frustrated. You also have a few folks that try as best they can to sell before like the end of the year. Maybe there's a tax implication associated with that decision. But ironically for me and my team, our best 2 months of the year for the past several years have been April and December. It's weird, I know. But we close our most properties in April and December. It's been that way for the past several years. So it's not that the market is slow. It's that there's a good opportunity for sellers that price their home right to get a good deal when they sell. But there's also enough inventory and, frankly, leftover inventory for buyers to sift through to find a good deal. I think just, if you look at the fact that we're hovering at around, $550,000 as a median sales price, you get $15,000, $20,000 in savings compared to buying in the peak spring season. I mean, that's a pretty substantial amount of money, especially if you're getting the seller to pay some or all of your closing costs. I mean, that could be a huge sigh of relief. But I think you're also dealing with less competition among buyers. So when you do come along and express interest in a listing, the seller takes that a little more seriously because they're not getting a lot of it unless they're a new listing, unless they're new to the market. It's a new offering. So, I would say get your finances in order now if you're thinking of buying in the next 6 months or less. Define your focus, be prepared to negotiate, and watch for off-market opportunities. I mean, this is where you're going to find some really good ones. And if that's something we can help you with, again, call or text us, 843-800-0065. That's 843-800-0065. Or check us out online at listingsincharleston.com. Thanks so much. You guys enjoy your weekend, and thanks for listening to the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show.
Join us for another edition of the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show next Saturday morning at 9 and Sunday morning at 10. Find him online at listingsincharleston.com. That's listingsincharleston.com. Or call him at 843-800-0065. That's 843-800-0065.